What is up, creators? I'm Daniel Adams, and today I have a super exciting guest that I'm excited for y'all to hear, see, know, understand. Nathan Bradford is with us today. I'll tell you a little bit more about Nathan first. Welcome in. How are you, Nathan?
I'm doing really good. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Thanks for being on. A lot of things we could be doing today. This conversation I'm especially excited to have because of everything that's gone into it for years and years and years. And we'll dig into all of that. Let me start with this. Nathan, I experience as a visionary, an award-winning cellist, a studio producer, and a composer. I've been playing a number of video games with my son, and music and soundtrack music specifically makes such a big impact, certainly for my son and I, but in telling stories, like it's part of this larger cultural archetypes and symbols move human beings, right? And it's like I've I've worked with all these families in hospice, right? Watched 800 people die. I've done 15,000 client hours meeting with all these people, like, and I see themes coming over and over and over again. And what I love about your music, Nathan, is that you touch on so many of these themes, and that's why I'm fascinated to have this conversation today. Um, and with the video game thing, I was just talking with my son, like, how does somebody come up with the music for this event, right? It's like you go through this whole storyline in a game and somebody's like literally narrating it with what sounds and what instruments and all these things. And for you to create the album Jesus Christ Easter Glory, that was released, it was Easter of 2024, correct?
hmm Yeah.
And similar with the same way we were wondering about, how does video game music get made? It's like, how do you come up with a work like that narrates so many of these deeply intimate moments that Jesus has for euphoria, for darkness, for fear, for, this full range of human emotion that Jesus experienced. That project is fascinating, so I'd love to dive into a little bit of that today. I want to talk about the Revolutionized album that, from what I've seen, has, 35 storytelling components with it, and we can dive into some of that. Um, I'm excited to see how your mind works and what your creative process is like because that's deeply inspiring to me, and I hope for many listeners too, who are working on large projects and impactful projects. So for anybody who's listening, set an intention. What would you love as you listen to this? What are you looking for? And I know that will, what we set intentions for, we see, and it comes to us quickly. So if you're listening, tune in, take a breath. What is it that you'd love from this conversation? And let's start with this, Nathan. What is bringing you joy this week?
I think what's bringing me joy this week is learning from mistakes and doing better and deepening my relationship with my wife
Hmm.
because we've been going through some up and downs with just the stress of like life, and I think we're doing a really good job at not letting it affect our marriage a lot, and we're just looking at the items as just items and not saying it has anything to do with us and each other. It's just learning how to create safe space for each other and listening and
Hmm.
kind of like giving up, extra time to make sure the other person feels heard and validated. So things like that are bringing me joy and just having just I love good terms with other people. I love it so much. Like if there's any conflict, I like to just get rid of it, be on good terms completely.
So you'll address things up front pretty quickly.
We patch up so fast. Like it's not like we have any like major contention or issues like a law or anything. It's just if there's any frustration, we just tend to make sure that we don't go to sleep with the feelings. We always talk everything out all the time. Like,
Yeah. So Nathan, I've seen that you've been composing. Well, you started cello at age 12, I believe,
yes, uh-huh.
and then you were composing in 2008. So it's been, what's that, 17 years. So that's a strong body of work. You're both an award-winning performance cellist, and then you've got this composition side. You've got all these influences from Alan Menken, that did so many of the Disney songs in the 90s. Amy Lee from Evanescence. I graduated high school in 2004, so like Evanescence was very much my jam. Like I'm right there. Thomas Bergersen, Epica, James Newton Howard, Henry Gregson Williams. You also have influences like Skillet, Kamelot, Breaking Benjamin, Within Temptation. So it's this wide range of musical influences for you that goes into both your composition and your performance. And just barely you shared really openly and honestly about like, here's what relationship is like day to day. Here's what my marriage is like day to day. Here's balancing composition work and then job work with like how do we have a fulfilling marriage. Curious for you, what parallels have you seen in the composition process that go along with making your relationship fulfilling and enjoyable and like co-creating what you're creating with your partner?
Well, it's kind of funny that you bring that up because today, um, I've been telling my wife, Juliana, hey, we should get out that song that we started a long time ago. And what it was is what it was getting out this laptop we're using right now for this interview. And we opened up Logic Pro and she just started like her inspiration. And then she gave me the laptop and then I added my inspiration. And then we passed it back and forth and came up with an activity that brings us together and creates kind of humor because we have such different styles where she loves the EDM and the electronic world and I love more of like the gothic like orchestral cinematic world and she loves cinematic as well but it's just combining the serious with the really like fun dance music and electronic dubstep stuff putting that together and it kind of seems like it wouldn't go together but it was surprising what we came up with so we use music as a mediator to stay connected and to uh, just keep our hearts light and happier instead of letting just the mundane robotic go to work, come home, go to work, come home, get in the way in the stresses. So it's a nice way to just say, let's do something that we don't usually do because everyone can just sit down and watch, Netflix or something, but it just seems to be out of the box to say, let's get the laptop and write a song together and let that connect us together. So that's how we've done it in our marriages, creative things like that.
One, it reminds me, and I remember when I was in college, we had a class on the Family Proclamation of the World, and they talked about like, hey, if we use this as source material for like how do you build an awesome marriage? And one of those things in there is wholesome recreation. And from what I'm hearing, it's like having this creative outlet to where you and Juliana are like, collaborating in this musical project, like there's a depth there. There's probably a messiness there. Like I imagine you don't agree on everything all the time, but it was like you're saying before, there are these moments where we can pause and witness each other and say like, oh, that's important to you. And that I think is so helpful. At least, anytime Tina pauses and it's like, oh, you feel that way, or oh, this is something that, that you really value. It's like, well, yeah. And there's something so validating about that, using that witnessing skill. I love that you touched on that. And it sounds like it's working for y'all.
It is, yes.
Love that. So there are a number of songs we could dig into. Well, let's start with just briefly. Um, What were what surprised you about the process of composing music to narrate New Testament stories in the life of Jesus Christ around Easter time?
I think the thing that surprised me was that I started the work kind of feeling like, can I even do this because it's new, never done it before, and then just really poured my entire heart into the thing and just trusted and didn't, I guess, let the worry grow to this point where it stopped me.
Hmm.
And I think involving prayer and different things helped so much too. And um, I just think the thing that led me was trust. And I think the trust surprised me what the outcome became because I didn't expect it was a lot bigger than I expected because of what I've done before compared to this are way different. So,
Right. And that's, you have such a wide range of orchestral compositions, and some of them have lyrics and some of them don't. Some of them are symphonic, some of them are, more song form. And we could nerd out on all of that too. And
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I love doing that kind of analysis. But I love the stories that come along with it, right? Because so many of these are th start. Well, let me ask this. When you sit down to write something, when you're working on the Revolutionized album, where do those little creative sparks come from? What's influencing those? Like, what does that creative process look like for you?
This is gonna sound maybe different than the average answer, but a lot of the creativity comes to my mind when I'm doing mundane things.
Mm,
So if I'm sitting in front of a computer in the past and said I have to pump something out right now, it probably won't be as exciting as I imagined. Sometimes it does happen, but I was working in the garden center at Walmart, and it's just kind of like, yeah, you're cleaning up the plants, you're watering this, you're using the register, and you're doing the things that you're not passionate about, even though it's somewhat enjoyable. It's not what you want to do with all your heart.
sure.
And I feel like when you are doing the things that you feel like you have to do because you're just surviving, I feel like that's when my mind wanders and I get really good ideas when I'm doing the things that I don't like to do. And it entertains me. Like I can think about those ideas for hours and build off of them. And then I pull out my phone and I hum the little melodies or come up with little tunes and I save them for later. And then I pull them out and then work on them at the piano. And it's a process. So it doesn't all come together really fast. I think
Mm.
one of the songs was like, it can be like from a couple weeks or a month to like a year for just like one song or something. So I think to answer your question, it just comes when people tell me you need to start doing this, you need to do that, then my mind goes really creative because I want to find a way to break out of the mundane and I find really inspirational places in my mind.
So like the more monotonous a task is for you, like, okay, fine, I'll do this task, but like that's where your mind starts to just be really generative and come up with melodies. I know I've heard songs about Paul McCartney, always slept with a notebook right next to his bed because you just wake up with, melodies. And that
Hmm
was, Hey Jude and whatever song, we're just like, oh, here's another one. And, and it sounds like you've got a similar thing with the iPhone where it's like, all right, let's hum whatever's coming through here. And it's like the more boring, mundane, monotony the task, it's like that's almost like the playground for the creativity to explode.
hmm
Super interesting. I want to talk too about kind of the history of Nathan. Um, when did you know that music was like a different language for you and this really rich mode of expression? Because not everybody has that.
um, I got extremely like dedicated and serious with exploring and devoting time into doing projects when I was probably a sophomore in high school.
Hmm.
And I think that was a hard time for me because I wanted my songs to come like everybody else's, but then they sometimes came out really different. And what I mean by that is someone would write a song and it's, first verse, chorus, second verse, chorus, and then the middle bridge, and then you repeat the chorus and you're done. And I think I was a little confused about like why I couldn't get mine to do that when I was in high school. It
Mhm.
turned into like part one for a movie, and then it turned into like a way different middle section for a movie, and then it had a reprise third section for a movie. And I'm like, this is like 10 minutes like of like random tangents of music. And I'm like, why can't I confine my music into just the average style of a song? And I think I remember being a little frustrated that it was really different. Like you couldn't just hear it on the radio. It's just so different. And then I've learned to love what I do because it's coming out that way for a reason, I believe.
Was there anything that helped you in your process? And then, context to the question, I most of what I compose ends up being through composed instead of, like you
Mhm.
said, like uh I just blanked.
Oh, you're
Having
okay.
verse, chorus, bridge, chorus, and then the end, to where it's like this repetitive, A, B, C, however you want to
Mhm.
frame, lots of different ways to talk about song structure. But so many of the things I've composed end up being through composed, where it's like nothing's the same. It's like this journey that starts at the beginning and then it ends at the end, and Beethoven tends to write that way, and Mahler and many of the great symphonies tell the story along the way. And it sounds, from what I've heard from your compositions, it's similar, where it's like, hey, we're narrating story here, so like verse chorus isn't the fit. What helped you accept your own process along the way? Because there's like, well, it should be this way, or here's what's popular, or here's how I want to fit in, or there's a difference between best-selling albums and best written albums, and even like
Mhm.
Eminem and different artists talk about like there's what sells and then there's what's good, and there's like maybe six people on the earth that can do both. Um, what helped you like accept your own process of like, okay, this is how I write and this is kind of my thing?
I think I I think I accepted my work when I got back from my mission better because I just appreciated movie soundtracks and I was always listening to movie soundtracks. And because it fit into that so well, I think that's what helped me accept it. But then also being able to go and just to give you a little preface, I was studying at Weber State University, and that school is very, very, very devout to classical music only. And I think I was struggling with how it's only one genre study of a school. And I can see why they do that. But for me, I wanted everything but that. And I was wanting to study soundtrack scores and I wanted to study orchestral artists and cinematic epic stuff. And that's the Thomas Bergersen side of me,
Hmm.
with Two Steps from Hell. But so basically, I went into the practice room and I knew I was supposed to study Haydn, like Opus 21 in D minor, you know,
This high
Sonata Part One or
classical, yeah.
whatever, and whatever the titles are. But and I just couldn't get myself to feel the passion. So I used to go into the practice room for hours, and it was almost like I was practicing the bare minimum of what they were asking me to practice, so I could pass my like exams at the end of the semester. But then my heart was devoted into writing my own music and imitating the music I love for piano and things like that. And so I wrote the first song was called Raquella, and I just thought the title was unique. I really thought it was cool, even though it doesn't have a meaning for why the title is that. It was just I wanted something that sounded kind of like a crow or something cool.
Hmm.
And then I remember when I went to a friend's house, he invited me over to record that. I think that's when I was able to appreciate the song so much because it was actually a really good recording and it was official. And I went to a concert of Evanescence in Vegas, and it was in 2017. I drove down all the way by myself, and this was the most perfect concert I could ask for because most of the concerts are just outdoors or with a regular kind of setting with loud rock and the drumming and all that stuff. And then this concert I felt like was meant just for me to experience because it was stripped of all of the loud rock, which I still appreciate, but it was taking all of the best songs and recomposing them into a symphonic orchestral concert.
Hmm.
And she was in the middle with the grand piano, and the orchestra was surrounding Amy Lee. And she had an overture, and she went right into her first song, and then went all the way through, and then had like an interluding middle composition on the piano solo, and then it finished with like this finale. And I was like, this is so cool. Like, I'm so grateful I got to be a part of this experience of Evanescence because it's not usually done like this. And so I came home from that concert inspired, and I wrote my own like overture for Raquella. And then I had a reprise and all this stuff. And I kind of followed that kind of standard. And it was so cool. And Juliana was a huge help and asset in making all this possible because she knew I loved composition when we were dating, and she bought me a refurbished Mac computer for $100, and she let me experience GarageBand for the first time, and that's where I got to make all my mistakes and record like crazy. And when I first instrumentalized Raquella, I remember pulling an all-nighter, and I didn't sleep all night because I was that passionate. And I was like, oh, the birds are chirping. It's morning already, like 5 or 6 a.m. And I was like, I didn't sleep, but I finished the song. Like,
So you just
so
got
that was,
completely lost in it, like
yeah,
no concept of time, like nothing. You're just completely immersed in this creative
yeah,
project.
yeah. That's how badly it inspired me in a good way. That's how, I mean, devoted it made me feel. So coming back from that was a highlight of connection and appreciation. So,
Well, and the contrast is interesting to me, like, working the Walmart garden center, which is like important and helpful and, helps a lot of people find what they want to find at the same time. It's like you said, it's pretty monotonous, right? Water this plant again, you know, let's make sure the inventory is on the shelves and everything's clean and whatever. But then it's like, here's this like, whoa, it gets me thinking like, is there anything that I would lose track of time doing? Is there anything that I'd stay up all night for? My son does it all the time for some of his video game campaigns. And it's like, I haven't for a while, and it's like, it gets me curious, like how often do you experience something like that?
um, I have not done that very often, actually, like staying up that late, but I have done a lot of 2, 3 in the mornings, but not all night.
But so it sounds like a lot of your compositions are like that level of passion to where if somebody's listening to Raquella, if somebody's listening to Coventry Carol, if somebody's listening to breathtaking scenery or a Raven song, like they all have a similar passion level. Am I understanding that correctly?
Definitely. Yes.
And tell me too a little bit. So I've been fascinated with crow symbolism and raven symbolism. Part of that was because, like I said, I graduated in 2004. So like when I was growing up, like Brandon Lee's The Crow was this huge big deal, especially because he was shot during filmmaking, right? And it was like this whole, cult following kind of thing. Tell me more about crow symbolism. Let's start with that. Like why crow? Like what kind of draw does that have for you?
I'm so grateful that you brought that up because I brought my little symbol just as a little way to segue into it. So, um, the significance of the raven and the crow is that most people would look at something that looks a little different and quickly judge it without really understanding the internal context or the heart of
Hmm.
the animal. And some people would say, oh, it's associated with witchcraft or stay away. They're mean birds or they're associated with horror,
It's
you
an
know?
omen or yeah, there's,
Yeah.
I think about Hitchcock's The Birds or you think about
Yeah.
the Edgar Allan Poe's Telltale Heart or
Yeah. So it's been getting a lot of bad raps. And I think that if the crow could talk, it would probably tell you that it's misunderstood or it's not as evil as everyone imagines, and that it has like a whole different side to it. And I know that crows are intelligent birds and they remember things really well and they can imitate sounds and different things. So the significance of the raven was I wanted a symbol that helped me capture a marketing thing where it's like this is my logo or this is what belongs to me. And so I wrote the Raven song as a way to be a metaphor of my life. So it parallels me. And so it's kind of like saying I felt really frustrated in school because a lot of the things that I loved presenting to my teachers was rejected because it wasn't following the rules of theory and it wasn't technically correct. And I used to get frustrated because this is the sound I loved. This is the sound I lived, breathed, and drank. And for it to be rejected felt really personal and it was really hard on me, I guess. I took it really hard. And I know that they weren't meaning anything personal. It was just got to do it the way they ask. And if you do anything different, then it's movie music. And movie music was frowned upon because it's not classical music. And so the Raven song was kind of like the lyrics say, take my life. And what it means by that is I present my life and let it be your separating tragedy because all the students before would follow suit of what's required. But then I come along and it's kind of like I get to do what I love doing. And it's kind of like an apology where it's like, sorry, I don't fit the mold, but I'm going to be original and I'm going to be true to myself. And if it doesn't get a high grade, I'm still in love with what I do and I still fight for what I do. And it's kind of like a parallel of I've maybe been looked upon as maybe I do things really different than the average person. And some people may feel like the stuff I do is a little too dark. So the crow's black, it's a little dark. But then I did a chat GBT examination of my work just to see what it comes up with. And it says, although the tone of it is addressing hardship and conflicts and things like that, it said the overall tone of the intention and the work of Revolutionized, it comes from a hopeful place. Like it leaves you at a resolve at the end of, transformation, resolve, beauty through the pain. So it's not just dwelling on just negativity all the way through. It's finding something positive
Hmm.
at the very end of it all.
And it sounds like that's just as much for you in your own personal journey
Yeah.
as, I imagine. So, the follow-up question would be, what do you hope people receive from your music or experience with your music?
That's my favorite question to be asked because my biggest hope is I loved the feeling of being so inspired by my favorite artists that I kind of took it upon me to like do what they do and I love it. And then I hope that someday someone could discover my work and feel such a fire and passion that they start doing their work. And then it's kind of like because of this chain, it's like this person inspires this person, which transfers down, 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 down the line. And you see like how it really keeps this genre, keeps this style alive, and it's kind of fun to think about like what your stuff could do for another person. Because if you
Hmm.
look at some artists that are inspired by certain things, like Amy Lee is the most inspired by Bjork. And I'm like, her music is not even close to Bjork. And so it's kind of like if Bjork didn't exist, the style of her music would not even be what it is. And so it's kind of cool to think that Bjork inspired Amy Lee inspired me, and it's kind of cool to see like if I inspire someone, what would that sound like? And I just want to create like a movement of like positive inspiration, I guess, and see what comes from it.
Brilliant. So many ways we could go with that. So rich, like both the symbolism of the crow and the raven in your own personal journey. Because I went through a music program also and had a very similar experience. Um, Ours was a teeny bit different. One of my professors came in one day and he was like, "Hey, I was just listening to, today's analysis is going to be Soundgarden's Black Hole Sun." Like
Mm-hmm.
that was so fun to go through that, right? And we were talking about all the, subdominants and all the
Oh
different
yeah.
theory behind how they were creating that, and does it count inside of tonality or out, and what are the different chord structures and so what's the harmonic rhythm underneath all that song. So that was fun. And then to be able to jump back into, and how does this relate to Beethoven? How does this relate to Haydn? How does this relate to
Yeah.
Mozart, and Brahms and anybody else, in the classical canon? But I felt a very similar, like, hey, you're here to learn the rules, and every musician wants to break them, but you can't yet.
Mhm.
And so there's
Yeah.
this like inner tension, that's like, all right, apply yourself, into this kind of straight and narrow road, but then also like I have this passionate side of me that totally wants to leak out. And where's there a healthy place for that? And then I know you and
Mhm.
I both studied music therapy, which was fascinating too, to look at how does music affect change in behavior? How does music affect change in neural networks? How does music affect change in our psychodynamic patterns and functioning? How can music be used with cognitive behavioral therapy hand in hand? So I was curious how your time studying music therapy played into some of your catalog composition choices also.
Well, it's cool that you brought up that we studied at the same school. So after Weber, I did move and transfer over to Utah State, where we both studied at different times, Daniel and I, but we had the same experience with the same teachers and the programs and the requirements. Um, I actually loved the music therapy, and I had Professor Olson or Dr. Olson for my theory teacher, and I thought his approach to everything was very open-minded and exciting. And what I loved about music therapy was my favorite thing of all in music therapy was when the professor would say, your assignment this week is to write a song, and you can't do it wrong. You just express yourself. You just pour out your soul and just bring it on Friday. And I was like, that is my favorite thing because you're not like competing, you're not stressed about a grade, you're just living normal and expressing yourself and bringing it. And I'm not saying this to like boast, but um, is it okay to say names on here? Like, I don't know. I said a few,
Totally up
but
to you.
um, one of the two people I really thought it was an honor to have the professor, um, it was Professor Winger and Professor Hearns, notice that I had a special talent for composition more than I had a talent for practicum and music therapy, psychology world. And so they brought out the best of inside of me of the compositional part of me. And they would have me come to the front of the class and say, I think this is one of the best songs that have come into the batch of songs, and we want to have him play it for everyone. And I always felt appreciated by my professors, and they would always bring up Alan Menken and be like, we can hear the Alan Menken influence in your work. And she's, I just smile when I think of you as composing, like, because we know how much you love it and how good you are at it and stuff like that. And so I'm just saying that humbly, but that's just their words. And it felt really good to be kind of like admired by your professor because they appreciate the work that you've done. And what's cool is Revolutionized has at least two or three songs that I actually wrote. Um, the Say Goodbye is one of the main ones that are original that my professor really liked a lot. And I orchestrated it and I sent it to her, and she texted back a message that said, it makes me smile to think of you composing this in an orchestral way or something. And and then Dark came from one of my other songs that I wrote for a theory class, and the melody of it, I couldn't just throw it in the garbage. I had to keep it because I liked it so much. But then the way that everything worked around that melody was way different than I expected. In the Dark was like a really satisfying accomplishment, but it started when I was like studying at Utah State. So there's a couple songs like that.
It's amazing to me how, as a parent, my child has such a different personality than his cousins or, other folks that he's playing with. It's like,
Mhm.
and I almost get the sense that each one of your compositions is like a different child.
Yeah, yeah.
and each one has their own growth arc, and each one has their own like origin story and conception story, and each one has their own like development, path.
Mhm.
What's it like to keep tabs on so many? Because I know Revolutionized, I believe, has something like 35 tracks.
Yeah.
So it's like this is a
Yeah.
substantial work, and same, the Jesus Christ Easter album, substantial work, like so many stories that you're narrating symphonically. Yeah. How do you keep up with all those music children?
It is hard to pick a lot of the favorites, but at the same time, I can at least come up with like the top five or the top three favorites, kind of. I think the one that resonates with me the most is probably a Raven song is the
Hmm.
first one. But then I also appreciate the ones that were the origins, like Raquella was the first one I wrote. So there's an appreciation for that one. And then I love songs that talk about real stories because I remember this is going to sound so crazy, but I remember when I was in high school, the hardest things I was dealing with was just like homework. And I wasn't like an adult living real life and, paying the bills and managing so many things all at the same time and holding a job, like, and all these things and lots of trials. It just felt like normal life, just go to school, come home, and just relax. So I remember listening to artists and I used to be like, gosh, like I would love to have some more trials so I have more to write about. And I would work through my mind, like, what kind of challenge or trial could I write about? Because I can't think of any. And then it's like I shouldn't have said that because then as soon as you grow up, then they all come and you don't want them anymore. But then you have lots to write about, and then you don't have the time to write with what you have going on as much. But it's just funny because I think the ones that mean the most to me are the ones where I had to go through something really hard. And I think college was probably some of the hardest things I had to go through before this chapter of life, for sure.
What do you feel like made like what was particularly difficult about college for you?
Um, I think it was I think it uh, made me question if I'm good enough all the time because there's a lot of comparisons, there's a lot of pressure to do well, there's a lot of got to keep your GPA at this level. You're always wondering if you're smart enough, you're always wondering if you're making the cut all the time or if you're misinterpreting instructions from professors and if you struggle really, really hard, like I struggled with music history like the most, and retook the first one several times and still had a hard time getting to even level two because it's just not how my brain thinks at all. I think the way that professors would sometimes talk to me made me feel like, am I not capable or, all these things. And then the homework was challenging. And I felt like what I naturally was really good at is just no pressure, just do your own thing and write your own music. And then it came across like maybe other people had a hard time with doing that, but they could do a music history test really well or write a paper really well. And so it's kind of like we were missing like each other on different spectrums of like, oh, my hardship is writing the paper, but yours is creative writing with music or writing lyrics or something. And that's something that came later in my life was I thought I was always really bad at writing lyrics until my professors in music therapy gave us assignments to do that more often. So it gave me practice. And when I saw that the result was coming through, I was like, okay, I'm not as bad as I thought, I guess. And then I just kept practicing until I was happy with my work. And now I feel pretty
Hmm.
confident that I could even help other people write lyrics for songs. But I think the challenge with school was a mixture of not feeling good enough constantly, mixed with um, the frustration that I couldn't be heard. My voice wasn't good enough with when I say my voice, I mean my brand wasn't
Hmm.
coming through. It wasn't being heard. It was being dismissed. And so I think there's a frustration that what I loved the most was not being validated or heard at all. It was just shoved in the corner because it wasn't classical.
Yeah, there's a lot
That's a
there.
long answer, but
It's it's a fantastic answer. A couple of things I wanted to touch on. One, I want to add my voice to Professor Winger and Professor Hearns.
Hmm.
true educators in every sense of the word.
Yes.
Both
Want to
incredible.
quickly
Go ahead.
clarify that none of this frustration had anything to do with them. It was way before them.
Sure. That I got that
Yeah.
sense. Just hearing you talk, it was like I had a similar experience with them where it's just like top-notch educators. I felt cared for as a person. And then
Mm.
also, technically or academically, it was still rigorous. And all the technical knowledge was there, but I also felt cared for as a person and seen and heard and
Yeah.
understood. And they really took the time to develop me as a human and then also develop the craft. And I love seeing this like nexus in your music career of all these different, there's like an emotional component. Like hobby's the wrong word for it, but it's clearly this passion that you have where it's like I'm at my day job daydreaming about all these songs, song after song after song, and I go home and just write
Yeah.
them till 3 a.m. in the morning, and it might be hard to wake up for work, but like, oh my gosh, I can't not record this, right? Or like you travel 9 hours to get down to Las Vegas to watch this Amy Lee show and like like here's this massive creative output that you're wanting to spread across to so many people, right? And then all of a sudden you're creating this Jesus Christ Easter work, which hopefully inspires millions. And I look at the success of shows like The Chosen, um, that's about to release season 5 here in the spring of 2025. Um, it seems like as as a society, we're all craving these moments of being seen, being heard, being understood, finding hope. Um, I know I certainly relate as you were talking about, so much of the inspiration for your music. What I heard you say was it comes from trial and struggle and pain and disappointment. And I wish I was up here, but my reality is here. And there's a gap there. And can music put a voice to that? Um,
Hmm.
I love
And
what you
connecting
shared.
with others.
So, and that's the hope too, where you like draw in others, right? Now we're having shared experiences. It's another beautiful angle. I really resonated too when you talked about, the voice of my brand is not going as far and wide as I'd like it to. It's like feeling invisible at some level. It's like I have all this,
Yeah.
you know, light and love and joy and artistic expression and inspiration that I want to share with all these people, but like, it's like I'm
Yeah.
speaking, but it's not being heard or not coming through. And where's the gap there? And that has been immensely frustrating for me too, to work through that
Yeah.
feedback loop of how do I get the right message out to the right group of people. And then especially if the
Hmm.
message is misinterpreted, which happens
Yeah.
often, which kind of leads to the next thing I wanted to touch on. What's fascinated me about your career, Nathan, is this like intersection of you're a devout member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So you're like your faith is very important to you. You're a parent, you're a dedicated spouse, you love heavy metal music, you love symphonic music, you're award-winning cellist. Um, there's so much like you've written an album about Jesus and all the joy and triumph about resurrection. And then there's also like a number of like horror themes,
Hmm.
in your music too. Um, you talked about like the bridge for Raquella comes straight from Dead Silence, and that
Yeah.
uh,
Yep.
so it's this
That's
fascinating,
the.
it's like you listen to the Dark Knight soundtrack, Hans Zimmer and Chris Nolan
Mhm.
in the Raven song, right? And then there's some Breaking Benjamin in there too. And so it's like, there's like double bass metal tracks in some of your music. And then also
Yeah.
it's like you're singing with your wife in some of your music. And it's this fascinating like intersection of classical music, contemporary music, Evanescence. Um, I want to talk about Tommy Karevik here soon. Um, horror and Jesus, like all in one. And it's like, Tell me about that intersection. What's it been like to blend all these different influences?
Well, the thing that was helpful is because I went through all this dark music that I composed throughout college and the hardship and emotions. I wanted my music to feel like it was real instead of just some poppy song that doesn't sound like it has a lot of substance and it's just to make the money.
Sure.
I wanted to make it sound like it was actually like real and people could feel the authenticity of it. And so coming out of that for many years, it was naturally easy. I'll just say it was really easy for me to write the dark moments in Jesus Christ Easter Glory because of all that practice. It was not hard to write the horror elements of, Judas hanging himself or the crucifixion or the flogging, like different elements like that were very easy to come up with because of this past history of writing that constantly, the drama. And then I think what was new for me was writing the light stuff.
Mm.
And so that was really a surprise of what came out from that. But how they all intersect is when you need dark elements, you have the practice to connect the dots of, hey, we need a horror moment here. You have the history under your belt to bring that through and things like that. So
I appreciate you speaking to that. It reminded me of some of Camille Saint-Saëns' music post
yeah.
concentration camp.
Mm,
And it's like when I read the Bible, like it's really violent.
yeah.
And there are so many things we censor on TV or the news, this violence or that violence, and protect the children, and which is important. And at the same time, like history is violent. The Bible is violent. Like people in my close circle have hung themselves. And it's violent. It's messy. Like somebody has the experience of walking into that. And there's fluid and there's things that we're not meant to see or not accustomed to seeing. And there is a darkness there. And it's like, how do you represent that? That's what I loved about music therapy is it's the concept that what there isn't words for, what we don't have even emotional capacity for, there are sounds to represent it. There's music to represent it. And what I appreciate about your music is that you have dove into these dark places of human experience and you can give it a voice in this really safe container.
Yeah.
You think about somebody
Absolutely.
getting flogged, like it's horrendous,
Yeah.
right? And it's like Mel Gibson's The Passion is rated R, and that's what flogging looks like. Like this is
Yeah.
like this is it.
That was a huge film for me too, and that soundtrack influenced the Easter Glory so much.
And it's like, how much do we show? And there are so many more, films that are coming out that are, true to what went on in human experience.
Mhm.
Like it's ugly the way Native Americans have been treated. It's, and and pick your group of people. I was just riffing on this the other day. Like we have a long history of violence in America that starts with a war in here that turns into I go push that on somebody else. And if I hope that's where it ends. I hope we can
I
use
like
things.
that.
I hope we can use things like music and empathy and kindness and ultimately the gospel of Jesus Christ to go, wait a minute, there's a lot of pain here. What's a safe chance or a safe container to deal with it and move through it so I don't have to go perpetrate on somebody else? It ends here. The cycle ends here. Jesus broke that.
Yeah.
And I love, you talk about your music being inspiring. It's like, it's interesting to consider. I want to bring up the ISO principle as one of the principles in music therapy. The ISO principle says basically you have to match somebody where they're at. Here's an example for folks listening. If you are asleep and somebody comes into your room and they're like crazy high energy and they're like super excited and super in your face, how do you react?
you kind of feel like you want to kind of avoid, maybe push away the energy that's coming at you, and it would be more, it's very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So,
It's like I'm either going to respond with anger or push back or like, hey, get out of my face. Like, because it's not the match, right? S- So if somebody's sleeping, you have to come in low and slow and gentle, or else it usually, disrupts. Music's the same way, emotion's the same way. It's all made of waves. I love David Hawkins' work that puts frequency waves measurable with each emotion, right? And there's a correlation with music and light and anything on a wave frequency. So like, you know, I love that your music touches on the dark and on the light. I think both can be inspiring because like life's not easy right now in 2025. A lot of unknown, a lot of suffering, a lot of violence, a lot of people at war in their own hearts, pushing it on other people. That starts in
yeah.
homes, right? That usually bleeds out into neighborhoods and then goes across the nation and overseas. I hope we can meet each other where we're at. And maybe music's a great tool for this, whether it's in the dark, whether it's in the light. Because the ISO principle back to music therapy says once you meet somebody where they're at, they now feel validated, open, connected, and we can move each other to a different state. So the idea being like, if I'm super anxious, can I find a song that matches the intensity of that anxiety and meet it? And hopefully, over time, I can find things that will calm me once I've met it where I'm at. Same thing if I'm super low and slow and we need to elevate, music has
Yeah.
the power to do that too. Long rambling rant on my part. But just highlighting like I love that there's such a wide catalog of music that you've been composing for the benefit of so many people.
Mm.
And so, for anybody listening, please go check out Revolutionized. We'll have, um, you know, how do we get that to people?
We could put a link in the video description that they
Oh,
can click
great.
on. So, yeah,
Yeah, go check out Revolutionized. Go check out Easter Glory, especially coming up, April 20th.
yeah.
It's coming soon. Um, 2025 be a great, great time of year to be intentional with that. What else, Nathan, would you love folks to come away with?
Um, I think I want to offer just a little bit of hope because I've had some people say things to me throughout the years, just here and there once in a while, um, that if you have a desire, you don't have to be an expert to begin. Like
Mm.
maybe you could just start with ideas, record them in your phone, play around with them. You don't have to be perfect because it's not the perfection that makes things great. Um, you can take a small idea and you can work with it and let it grow and grow and grow into something that you didn't even expect because you had the willingness, you had the faith to do it. And so I think my message would be if you feel like you have an itch or an ear for writing something, whether it's a book or music, or if you like the same things as what I do, um, just don't doubt yourself. Just give it a go and see what comes from it. And even if it takes longer than you expect, just stick with it and you'll be really grateful that you did. And I think there's probably a lot of hidden talents that are inside of all of us that probably would surprise us and say, I didn't ever think I could do this. Because for example, I work with a Spanish speaker and I thought, oh, never spoke another language, never took high school Spanish, never learned another language ever. And just by just diving in and learning all I can, I don't really feel like I'm fluent, but I have a lot of words memorized that I can communicate decently with the person I work with that speaks Spanish. And I think there's hidden things that we might be surprised inside of us. Be like, I never thought I could cook, never thought I could speak Spanish, never thought I could write a song. So it's just that hope that like don't be frustrated with yourself. Just run with what comes to your mind and just see what blossoms.
What a great message. Start where you're at. Let the creativity flow. Yeah, why put limits on it? Love that. One other piece I wanted to touch on today, I know you said Amy Lee was this like seminal figure that's kind of, the Evanescence band and Amy specifically has been with you for years and years and years. You went and had this seminal experience in Las Vegas that like changed the trajectory of Nathan's life and hopefully many others as you've paid that forward. Tell me a little bit about Tommy Karevik and what you love about Tommy's work. And well, let's start there.
Okay. So Amy Lee was definitely a huge inspiration because um, I felt like I had a very sensitive side to myself as a kid. I had a very soft side to my style of approaching things, and I didn't have that skillet style as a kid. It wasn't like raw, like go and wrestle someone and kind of be that powerhouse kind of thing. It was more of that like I grew up in a house full of feminine influences like sisters, cousins, and lots of, friends around the neighborhood that were women. And so I think I was more of a gentle person and I really was drawn and fascinated by voices that could fluctuate and slide and transition to other notes in a haunting, silky way. And um, I think the first time I was given chills and I couldn't handle like coming across this kind of thing was the very beginning of Bring Me to Life, that open line of how can you see into my eyes, like open doors. Right when you get to, because I've, where I've become so numb, that whole section, just from there to the word numb, I would rewind it and be like, I got to experience that again. Rewind it, got to experience that again. And then I discovered the open door, and there's songs like Lacrimosa, and there's songs like Good Enough, and Your Star, and Like You, and all these songs where she does these like influx in the voice where it slides into other notes so chillingly. And I'm like, who does that? Like, I don't know very many artists that can do that really well,
Very
where it
unique.
actually has an effect on your soul. And I was like, that actually matches the vibe that I used to have as a kid. Because I remember,
Mm.
okay, I'm going to share a vulnerable moment with you before I move into Tommy Karevik. Is I remember in school, I was on the school bus, and I think it was either on the way home from school or I was going to a field trip. And these rough kids came through and they were singing We Will Rock You. And that was the first time I came across it. It was probably like first, second, third grade. And I didn't like the tone of it because it was so rough and so in your face. And like, I think they changed the lyrics to We Will Sock You, Rock You, Pick You Up and Drop You. And they were just being really like their way. And it wasn't my style at all. And I was kind of like that shy kid that wanted to hang out in the back and appreciate the beauty rather than the rough. And so I remember practicing in my own mind singing We Will Rock You because I learned that tone and I sang it in that same silky, beautiful way to match my vibe. And then when I came across Evanescence, it almost felt like I was meant to discover it because it was matching the way I was behaving as a elementary kid and where I avoided conflict, I avoided the rough housing, and I just really enjoyed beauty and um, gentle, soft kind of content. And so that really, I think my Immortal, not the demo that everyone loves, but the actual music video version where the guitars come in at the end, the studio version, her voice in that, and then also the song Missing, those three songs were just chilling. Like I'm like, I can't believe that this is even like a voice, like doing this with their voice. It was just so impressive. So that governed a lot of like the decisions I would make through writing all this music for Revolutionized. And then I discovered Epica because of Evanescence, and then it led to With a Temptation, and then it led to Epica. Epica is Simone Simmons or Simons. She's a redheaded Dutch female symphonic woman fronting this metal band with these guys with long hair and guitars that growl and scream and things like that. But the overall like approach to their music is orchestral cinema, and
Hmm.
epic choir Hunchback of Notre Dame with all of these combinations of influence. And there's a section of their music where they'll just take a moment and they'll play like the Chopin like moment on the piano, and it will go right into this epic Atlantis like James Newton Howard moment, and then it would go right into the growls and the screams. And it's like, how do you go from beautiful opera to like cathedral organ and choir to scream? Like it's like, and so the, how this leads into Tommy is he actually sang with Simone Simons, and he fronts Kamelot, and he also is the lead singer of his second band called Seventh Wonder, and he's also a firefighter on the side. So he's a busy guy. And he said in his bio that the work that inspired him the most was Phantom of the Opera. And I felt like the work that inspired me the most as a young kid, he was 12. And then when I was about 7, Hunchback of Notre Dame inspired my work. And then he was a shy person who didn't want to be on stage. And he kind of felt like he was put out of his comfort zone to be in front of people. And also, he is a perfectionist. Like, he doesn't think very well of his takes, and he has to redo them and redo them and redo them, and he over like thinks his work sometimes, and he wants the best of the best, and even if it's exceptional, he still wants to redo it to make it even better. And that's how I've been, and I feel like there's some connections like that. And then he he has a stellar vocal ability to sound like a Broadway singer, and it's not like he has an operatic voice. He has more of a contemporary, like
It's a great tone.
modernized, like strong voice. And it's just phenomenal singing. And I think when I would take voice lessons, I used to gravitate towards the Amy Lee style of singing. And they say, you need to follow more of a male example for singing so you don't sound like a woman. And I think Tommy is like a perfect example of who I would love to imitate because he has that very breathy, dramatic Phantom of the Opera sound, but then he can also go extremely high. And then he can be very, very strong and passionate and soft. And he encompasses a lot of amazing vocal technique. And he was actually discouraged from singing for metal because it was such a loud competition against his soft style of singing. Like his voice isn't that loud compared to all the heavy metal around him. And they're like, you're going to ruin your voice. Like, you need to switch your genre. But he was committed to the genre. And I think he does really well, and it inspires me a lot. And a lot of Epica has inspired my
Hmm.
work too. So,
That's cool to hear your experience, both like the personal connections, and because you point out I think one of the bigger conversational points, at least that I'm noticing as we talk today, is look into it, what comprises, masculinity. And, is there room for men to be gentle and soft and sensitive and quiet and expressive and I think there is space for that. And I think more and more men speaking to their experience and being as authentic as possible, no matter how it looks, gives us all, permission to find our own brand of masculinity and what that balance looks like.
yeah. And I look back and I'm like, of course I had the more feminine influences because when I was my son's age, my mom would always play the Carpenters music around the house. And I know her voice has that exact kind of like similarity to like that style. And also, my mom loved Donny Osmond, and his voice is more of that soft singing style as well. So a combination of the Carpenters' influence and Donny Osmond in my home, I think it led to Amy Lee really easily. And so it's maybe I'm just putting all the stuff together, like maybe why that is. So
Sure.
finding my own style in the process too.
Yeah, and like that only grows over time, I'm excited to see where you go next. You've had a pretty impressive catalog output. I don't know if
Thank
you'll be
you. Thank
slowing
you.
down anytime soon, but excited to see what you come up with next. And For you folks listening, a lot of suggestions today. I'm going to add one more. I've been way into the band Unleash the Archers recently.
I'll have to
Uh,
check them out.
it's it's Canadian metal. The lead singer is named Brittany Slays.
Wait, is it a male or a female?
Female.
Female. Okay. I just
They
didn't know because you know how there's Marilyn Manson, but it's a man.
sure.
So, but and it was Unleash the what?
Unleash the Archers.
Okay. I wrote that down on my phone. I'm gonna go check it out.
You know, and
Love new ideas.
we talked about Tommy Karevik with Camelot with a K, right?
Yep.
We talked about Breaking Benjamin. Obviously, go relive 2003, pull up your Evanescence, bring
And
me to
Disturbed.
life. Disturbed is in there, right? Um,
Yeah.
Lots of great suggestions today. Highly, highly, highly recommend, pull out your New Testament
Yeah.
and listen to what came through in Nathan's heart as he was reading so many of these New Testament stories. What would they sound like? Incredible experience listening to the Jesus Christ Easter. Um, is it an album? Is it a
I
orchestral
would call
work?
it an album. Yeah.
Yeah, Jesus Christ Easter Glory. That's both up on YouTube, also on Apple Music, also on Spotify, yes.
Yeah.
And then we talked a lot today about Revolutionized as well. So go give that a listen. And Nathan, one thing I've loved about you, you always want to hear feedback. You're like super interested in folks, what do they think of it? What worked, what didn't work, all of it. You're open to that. So, reach out to
Yeah.
Nathan. Where's a great place to interact with you, Nathan?
Um, I think YouTube and Facebook. I do have Instagram too, but just leaving comments on any of those is great. So,
A great place for conversation. And that's where social media is at its best, right? Where we get to discuss ideas and share what we think and feel and hopefully respect each other. And, let's make social media fun again, useful and
yeah,
creative, collaborative.
exactly. Yeah. I
Anything else as we wrap up today, Nathan?
think we covered it all. And maybe the last thing I'm going to say is maybe the work of Revolutionized isn't going to be such a driving force going into the future because I love soundtracks so much that maybe we might see some more biblical works coming rather than revolutionized works coming. So,
Well, stay tuned. Lots of exciting things coming out of the Bradford corner of the universe. For everybody
yeah,
listening, go hug somebody you love today. Take a breath. Go stick your feet in the grass. Go listen to some great music. God bless you. Hope you're well and have an amazing freaking day.
it's always a pleasure, Daniel. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nathan.